Thank you all for joining us. I'm Candace Shively with Utah State University Extension, and I will be your host today. My co-host, Satal, is one of our mini presenters, so he is off the hook for the Q&A session. Today is not our typical webinar event. These monthly webinars are supported by Utah State University's Center for Water Efficient Landscaping. And today we have multiple presentations from those that are associated with CWEL. So welcome to our virtual field day. I'm going to turn things over to Kelly to kick us off. Kelly is our Extension Turfgrass and Water Conservation Specialist, and she also serves as the Director for the Center for Water Efficient Landscaping. So welcome, Kelly.
Thanks again, Candace, and I'd like to wish you all a good afternoon and welcome you to our virtual seminar. As Candace said, my name is Kelly Kopp, and I direct the Center for Water Efficient Landscaping. And as the director of CWEL, I have the great fortune of working with a very talented and hardworking group of individuals on a wide array of water efficient landscaping topics, which you'll hear about today. And speaking of my colleagues, they include so many individuals, including Drs. Paul Johnson, Joanna Enterwada, Yoping Soon, Sital Podial, our now retired emeritus colleague, Dr. Larry Rupp, Candace Shively, who hosts these webinars, Paul Harris, Susan Buffler, Mike Hilcrease, and Chris Gerard, some of whom you will hear from today. And we're supported in our efforts by a crop, forgive the pun, of very talented graduate students, including Paige Boyle, JJ Chen, Asmita Powdell, Chris McGinty, Jenny Kohler, Mariah Jackson, and Alexis Coling. Again, some of whom you will be hearing from today. And I did just want to provide a brief introduction to our center. I know that many of you are familiar with us and familiar with what we do, but for those of you who may not be, we have a mission, a twofold mission, I should say, that includes conducting research on effective irrigation techniques, landscape water demand analysis, low water use landscaping, and plant water needs, to name a few. But then we couple that mission with the additional effort of disseminating that information to the folks who need that in a very broad sense. So that would include water purveyors, the green industry, local USU extension offices, as well as regional extension offices. That's happening increasingly, and the public. And that's all in an effort to support water efficient landscaping with the absolute bottom line of saving water in what is an increasingly water scarce environment. So we've actually been conducting and disseminating this type of research for more than 20 years at this point. So we have quite a track record, I would say. And our work has only become increasingly important as we face ongoing drought conditions in the southwestern United States, and as landscape water conservation and sustainable landscape management have become a larger and larger component of our state's water conservation efforts. And as we continue into our third decade of research and extension work, we are certainly facing some daunting challenges in the way of drought and climate change. But I do take comfort in the fact that our center continues to produce actionable solutions to these challenges and share those within our state and region. So again, I'd like to welcome you to our field day. We're so glad you're here and very much appreciate this opportunity to share some of the work with our center. So that sort of ends the introductory portion. And because I have some other commitments, I'm going to go right into the research topics that I'm going to share today. And as Candace mentioned, I am the turfgrass specialist here at Utah State University, as well as the water conservation specialist. But whenever I'm talking about turfgrasses, I like to start off with this infographic that just describes some of the benefits that we receive from turfgrasses in our landscape, not least of which is the production of oxygen, groundwater recharge, carbon sequestration, among many, many others. And I sometimes think that the benefits of turf grasses as a plant in the landscape get lost in conversation. And so I always like to start out by sharing some of these benefits, these eco services, in fact, that we receive from grasses in our landscapes. And related to what I want to share, just in a broad sense, we know that grasses have very, very different water requirements. We categorize them broadly as warm season and cool season grasses, but even within those broad categories, there are differences in water use depending on species. And then beyond that, there are further differences that relate to the varieties within those species. So just a whole lot of things to consider. And it's really, I would like for it to be a more nuanced conversation than it sometimes is. And so to that end, we do conduct a great deal of research related to turfgrass varieties. Now, one of the reasons that we do that is that there is a challenge for really anyone who is trying to work with grasses in the landscape and do so in a way that is water efficient and that considers the local environment. And one of the challenges we have is that what is widely available in the world of turfgrass seed, things that are described as perfect seed or Southern gold, whatever the case may be, may work well in one area, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be the perfect seed for every area. And that is the reason that we here at USU in the center conduct a lot of research, trialing different types of grasses, different species of grasses and varieties, so that we can see what works best in our area. And for those of you who aren't in our region, I would just add that there are many, many other land-grant universities like Utah State University who conduct similar work. And so even if you don't happen to be in Utah or in our region, this information is very likely available to you and is more appropriate to you because it's being conducted in your area. So we participate in a number of national trialing programs at USU with the understanding and intention that turf grasses can be functional in drought situations when managed properly. And that word functional is coming up more and more as I work in the area and the region in different capacities. And functional versus non-functional turf grass is a big conversation that's happening right now. But they can be functional when managed properly. And that means that species and varieties need to be selected for that purpose. And it's absolutely critical in light of increasing pressure on our water resources. And so we do that sort of work with the goal of screening a wide range of species and cultivars for drought response of different types, whether that's acute drought response or chronic. We identify those that really perform well within the species we evaluate. And we also investigate some of the basic mechanisms that these grasses use to have enhanced drought tolerance. And then we provide that information to our cooperators and the supporters of this research, who then go on to brand and market the cultivars that work best. So there are a couple of organizations, I should say, that we work with on a very regular basis. One of these is the Turfgrass Water Conservation Alliance, which was founded in 2010 by a number of seed producers in the country. And this was really unique because it brought together direct competitors in the industry to support research like I'm going to share with you here today. And it qualifies different turfgrass varieties. And they have to have been proven statistically to reduce water use by a minimum of 30% over traditional varieties, sometimes more, but at least 30% before they are branded and marketed. And this research is conducted right across the country in different locations to see which varieties perform best in which location. And then again, that information is used to brand, market, grow, produce that those superior varieties. And this organization also does a lot to educate and reach out to industry, government, and other end users so that these superior varieties can be implemented in our landscapes. To describe some of the protocols that we use with this trialing, with chronic drought stress, what we do is we decrease irrigation. We water weekly at some percentage of evapotranspiration, which for those who may not be familiar, describes the amount of water being lost from the soil and plant system. And then we use digital imagery to quantify how those grasses respond to those conditions. Similarly, but somewhat different, we also have acute drought stress conditions where we absolutely turn off the water. We simply stop watering these grasses and we don't start again until the best performing variety reaches 25% green cover. And then we go through a rewatering recovery process with those varieties. Another organization that we cooperate with quite a bit on trialing turf grasses is the National Turfgrass Evaluation Program, which has been around for many, many years. It's a cooperative effort between NTEP and the USDA, again, to evaluate turf grasses and particularly to evaluate varieties for different purposes and applications. They have also come into this space of evaluating varieties and species for drought tolerance, and we are working with them in that capacity, again, to identify superior varieties and varieties that work really well where we are and allow us to reduce water applications in a significant way. Just like TWCA, NTEP has trialing going on right across the country, as well as in Canada, to reflect geographic differences. These protocols, I don't want to get into too much detail because I want to be sensitive about time, but they're similar in terms of acute stress and chronic stress, and then evaluation with percent green cover. So, just to give you a visual of how this works, we'll receive seed from our cooperating organizations. We prepare a seed bed and spend, a morning or a day putting that out there, raking it in, covering it, getting it established. And in the beginning, as we're getting things established, they don't necessarily look great. You can see there that we've got quite a bit of weeds in this plot as it gets established, but that's to be expected. And I guess I should back up and just make it very clear that before we impose drought on these species and varieties, we do make sure that they are well established so that they are starting from a good point before we start trying to stress them with drought. This is one of our TWCA trials. This is a tall fescue trial that we are continuing this year. And I wanted to show this picture because we actually do construct, in some cases, rainout shelters so that even natural precipitation is excluded. And so when I say it's the imposition of acute drought, I mean, it is the imposition of acute drought. We don't allow any precipitation or irrigation in that case. So as I mentioned with all of these trials, sort of the bottom line information and data that we gather have to do with digital imagery, which is categorized in terms of how much green cover we get. So for example, on the left, you see a photographic image of a plot of turf grasses, but on the right, what you see is how the software we use takes that image and determines how much green cover there is in the overall picture. And hopefully this image is coming through okay, because what I'm showing here are two different varieties, in this case of Kentucky bluegrass. And what you see on the left is one variety called Mallard that has 38% green cover, another on the right called Geronimo that has 2% green cover. So they are very different in terms of the percent green cover after 50 days without irrigation. So this was an acute drought study in this case. And so I think this is a nice illustration of how different these varieties can be. And again, these are both varieties of Kentucky bluegrass, but they have very, very different percentages of green cover. And I know this is small and I don't want to get too far into the details here, but I think you can see there are differences as we move from left to right across this graph. And these are different varieties, again, of bluegrass. And it just illustrates the different water savings that might be achieved depending on the species that is evaluated and chosen. And I do just want to kind of wrap up my time with how we then take that research-based information that we collect and disseminate it and use it with our cooperating agencies, in this case, Salt Lake City. So we worked with Salt Lake City this past year to develop a customized seed blend of turfgrass species and varieties that had performed well in our trials. And then the city cooperated with TWCA as well to provide this seed to their customers at cost. And the annual irrigation requirement for this particular seed mixture is 18 inches per year growing season, as opposed to the 35 inches that is commonly applied now. So this program is called Trade Up, Dry Out, and Stay Green. And again, it's helping the residents of Salt Lake City transition higher water use grass areas to lower water use grass areas. And we did a lot of educational support around this program, videos on how to make the transition from existing lawn areas to these lower water use species. And we had a really nice demonstration at one of the city's water facilities. So the image you see there on the left is an aerial image of one of the water pump stations in the city. We used that as a demonstration. And we converted that entire lawn area to these lower water use varieties. And so far, what we've seen in this case is that the water applications to that area have been able to be reduced by 40%. So even better than what we were hoping for. This is the same property sort of over the winter as things were dormant, but you can see where the lawn area is. That was established very well by the end of the fall last year and is looking really very nice this year. And we're anticipating even more water savings. So that is just an example of how we conduct the research as part of the Center for Water Efficient Landscaping, but then disseminate that information to the benefit of our collaborators and partners. So that's it for me. I think, Candace, do we have a minute for questions?
Yeah, definitely. So just a heads up, we're going to do a general Q&A session at the end, but Kelly's got to run, so we're going to do hers now. So if you have questions for Kelly, now is your chance to ask her. So please type them into the Q&A box and we will get those addressed. What varieties are in the seed blend for the Salt Lake City mix?
Okay, so it's a mixture of one tall fescue variety, which is Falcon 4, and one Kentucky bluegrass variety. And oh, I'm kicking myself because I didn't look it up right before this presentation. I would be happy to share that with you. Okay, Mark, I even know who you are. I will send you an email and let you know.
Awesome,
I apologize for that, folks.
Let's see. So Susan is wondering, did you do complete removal or did you overseed?
Okay, so that's an excellent question. And the goal with this project was to make it as easy as it could possibly be. And so we did not do complete removal. All we did was mow incredibly short in the fall. We did spray out the existing turf with a non-selective herbicide, and then we directly overseeded into that lawn, and it just worked fabulously.
Awesome. Will the Salt Lake City seed mix be available to others outside of the city or in the general marketplace? Great question.
Yes, great question. So there has been, let me just back up and say that the Salt Lake City program went live early August and sold out in 3 weeks. It was incredibly popular. And so there's been a whole flurry of activity happening right now to get new seed in. So to answer your question, yes, it will be available to others. We're trying to work to make it statewide with appropriate mixtures, depending on where you are in the state. But we're kind of in the process. We're anticipating new seed within the next couple of weeks, I believe.
Okay. Hey, Kelly, so I think I found your seed mix bag. Is it the 2 Falcons and then the Diva?
Yes, Diva. Diva
Okay.
is the bluegrass, and then there's 2 Falcon varieties of tall fescue. Thank you, Candy.
You bet. If anybody's interested, I'm going to type the answer into the Q&A box under Mark Mason's question, so you'll have that. Let's see. Okay, is there a chance that Utah will look at allowing Bermuda grass, or maybe you can address why we don't allow Bermuda grass and then other warm season grasses?
Yes. Okay. We do allow other warm season grasses. There's no restriction on any other warm season grass beside Bermuda grass. But Bermuda grass is not generally allowed because historically it's been considered a noxious weed. In fact, one of the top 10 noxious weeds in the state. The reason for that is that originally Bermuda grass was a pasture grass, and more specifically common Bermuda grass, which is a very old variety, became very invasive. And so I understand why decades and decades ago it was considered a noxious weed. However, and I'm really glad the person asked that question, because newer varieties of Bermuda grass are not invasive. They only are, they're planted and spread vegetatively. And so they don't create that same issue as old common Bermuda grass did. One county in our state currently does allow Bermuda grass, and that's Washington County. I've seen so many soccer fields down there, for example, that are doing just fantastically with these newer varieties. And so it is my sincere hope, sincere hope that we can extend that to the rest of the state. And I know, for example, that we have colleagues at BYU who are currently doing some work with Bermuda grass and looking at cold tolerance and things like that. I think we need to be moving in that direction. We have, as I've just mentioned, lower varieties of cool season grasses, but we also have a wide range of warm season grasses, including Bermuda grass, that are genetically built to use less water. And we need to be taking every advantage of those opportunities. So I'm hopeful that will change. I think, I think these things are more top of mind than they've ever been. And so I think we have a good opportunity.
Great. And then final question, were you able to reduce that water need in just one season?
We were, and the reason is that we got that grass fully established last fall. No, 2021. What am I saying? So November 2021 is when we had it. We considered that to be fully established, and we had seeded it at the end of September. And so at that point, we considered it fully established. So in spring of 2022 and through the 2022 growing season, we were able to implement those lower water applications. And it was right around a 40% reduction from what it had been.
That's impressive. Really impressive. Cool. Kelly, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, everybody. I wish I could stay with you, but for what it's worth, I'm at a workshop that we'll be bringing back to Utah, and I'm excited to share that with you in the future. So
awesome. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks.
Cool. All right. Up next, we are going to continue the turf talk with Paul Harris, and he's going to cover how well Kentucky bluegrass performs under low irrigation with varying fertilizer rates, and then how it recovers from summer dormancy. So Paul, I will turn the time over to you.
So my name is Paul Harris. I'm a research technician for the Center for Water Efficient Landscaping. And so I have the opportunity to work directly with all the professors in CWEL, along with all the graduate students with their research. But my main background is in turfgrass science. I used to work in the industry, in the golf course industry. And so I've since transitioned over to this job. This is a picture of our research farm last year in the middle of summer. So if you recall last year, we were under extreme, drought watch. We were implementing, drought protocols. Only the absolute necessary watering was happening. So if it wasn't active research, we just cut it off cold turkey. And so that started to raise a lot of questions. So what can we do to manage turfgrass better during drought? And there's, kind of textbook answers that we can give people and kind of guidelines, but unless you can see a picture of the differences, it's kind of, you have to take our word for it. So that's what I set out to do this summer and last summer, was kind of give you some evidence of what turfgrass can do, and also kind of solve some of my own curiosities about what might happen under drought. So one of the questions I wanted to answer was how much nitrogen can we put on nitrogen fertilization? How much can we fertilize our lawn, and how well does that affect drought tolerance? So if we fertilize more, does it make it more drought tolerance? Where do we draw that line of too much fertilizer isn't really doing all that much difference? This plot here, you can see kind of differences in the individual squares there. And we were looking at basically low, medium, and high fertilizer rates. Some of these darker ones were higher, some of these less colorful ones were a lower fertilizer rate. So this was the end of August. This was actually the day before we started the recovery. So this is about what it looked like the entire summer, aside from the little bit of rain that we got the first part of August. But this is what we were looking at. And based off of this picture, it's kind of like, case closed, add more fertilizer and your lawn will do great. Not so. So if you look at, so this is the same plot, same day, but we took a picture from a different view. So you kind of see that arrow's pointing to a kind of a dark greenish gray. So that grass is actually wilting. So that's lost all of its turgor pressure, and it's in the process of going dormant. And you can kind of see the other lower fertilizer rates. They still have turgor pressure. They still are maintaining some green, tissue. The observation that we were able to make from this is increased amounts of fertilizer. Think of your regular 4-step program and then add 50%. So adding more fertilizer to your lawn isn't necessarily going to make it more drought tolerant. So in this state right here where these leaves are wilted, the turgor pressure is lost, if I were to drive over that with a golf cart or a lawnmower, you would see a dead tired mark from that. Whereas these other lower fertilizer rates, you wouldn't see that. After that picture, we initiated recovery. This is 7 days post recovery. You can see all the grasses, they look healthy. The ones with the higher fertilizer rates, they look a lot better. This is that same angle. And again, you can see the higher fertilizer rates, they recovered quicker. So that's kind of the trade-off. So you see kind of the peaks and the valleys with higher nitrogen fertilization. You see, a quick recovery, but you also see a quicker wilt, where if you kind of keep it in that, mid-range, you'll be able to kind of maintain it consistently to look similar throughout the growing season. And the main summary that, we want to make with this plot or with this study is that if you keep your grass healthy going into summer, it'll do just fine. It'll recover from drought. One thing I didn't mention was the irrigation for this. So we maintain this at 50% ET. So twice a week, we'd go out there, we would collect data from our weather station and apply half of whatever water was lost. Put that in perspective. Think of a typical amount of water you'd put on a home lawn and then cut that in half. And that's what we were irrigating this at. The next question that we wanted to answer is, what is the bare minimum amount of water that we can put on grass and still have it survive? Not have it look good, but to survive the summer dormancy. So this is another look, a drone image of our research farm in the middle of July last year. So this is data I'm actually showing you from last year. This year we had a rainstorm that came unexpectedly that ruined a lot of our drought research. I don't know if you can see, but this little tiny square, that's where we're going to be focusing on for this study. We were looking at different irrigation rates, and we were only irrigating once per month. And what we have here is this plot was receiving a quarter, a half, or 1 inch of irrigation once per month. And it didn't look good. I mean, almost to the point that it was probably going to be a fire hazard if someone licked a cigarette butt on it. But that's what it looked like for July and August. It didn't look good. And right around the mid-August, I was thinking, well, who knows what's going to happen. Then September rolls around and the temperatures start to cool off. We get a little bit of rain and we start to see a recovery. The thing I want to pay attention to is these borders in between the plots, they were unirrigated. So there's a definite difference between what received just a little bit of irrigation and what received, almost none at all. And then October, November, we see some more recovery. And again, you can look at the border areas where there is some recovery, but it's very sparse. Any cultivars that we had that were somewhat sensitive, they completely died out. And you'll notice, kind of this circle of dead grass. We suspect that was a cultivar of Kentucky bluegrass that couldn't tolerate the heat. This was done on an area of our farm that had been sodded about 20 years ago, and kind of we didn't do a whole lot. We keep it alive. We spray weeds, once a year and fertilize it, not a whole lot, maybe twice a year. So we give it the bare minimum. And this is what your turf grass is capable of if you can put, water once a month. And the reason for this research, say municipality needs to implement extreme drought measures. So like a school playground cannot be watered the entire month of July. Well, it'll be just fine. Go on vacation for a couple of weeks, shut your water off, your grass will do all right. And just the take home from this is your grass can survive basically anything you can throw at it as long as you can water it at least once a month. And that was the bare minimum. I mean, maybe next year we'll go 6 weeks. And really the takeaway from all of this research, the research that Dr. Kopp was talking about is your grass is a lot tougher than you think. It's tougher than you give it credit for. If you have a dry spot in your lawn, don't worry about it. It'll be just fine. And with that, thank you for listening, and I'll turn the time back over to Candace.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. Hey, just one quick question while I have you.
Yeah.
What do you mean when you say you initiate recovery?
So we just want to bring it back to life. So back when, so like on this plot right here, so this picture was taken September 1st, September 2nd, we turned the sprinklers back on and we resumed typical irrigation. So we went from 50% irrigation to 80% to 100%. So we're not overwatering it. It's just normal irrigation.
Okay, cool. Thank you for that.
Yep, no problem.
All right. If you have questions for Paul, go ahead and type them into Q&A, and we'll do a general Q&A session at the end. We've got 6 or 7 more presentations that are going to be about 5 to 10 minutes each. Up next, we have Smita Waddell, and she is going to be discussing irrigation water quality and how to develop best water management practices for nursery production.
Are we good?
That looks perfect.
I am a graduate student here at Utah State working with Dr. Yopingson. I'd like to jump with my presentation. As we all know, Utah is one of the driest states, and Utah governor recently declared a state of emergency due to drought conditions. Even though we are in dry state, we are using huge amount of potable water for landscape irrigation purposes. And use of alternative water or secondary water can be done to irrigate landscape plants or ornamental plants to help conserve potable water. Therefore, the compulsion of using alternative water or secondary water to irrigate the landscape plants or ornamental plants makes it essential and meaningful to study the water quality and also determine the salt tolerant plant for using in those affected areas. The approaches that we generally followed under these projects are monitoring the irrigation water quality, so that helps the growers to monitor their water quality, like what is the water quality they are using for irrigation, and using the resilient plants and good drainage substrate, using different microbial inoculant like Frankia, use of mycorrhizal fungi, and also use of different biostimulators. Okay, so the first approach is like monitoring irrigation water quality for nursery production. We monitored 6 different nurseries in Utah, and they were basically using groundwater or secondary water, that is unfiltered and unfiltered water for irrigation purposes. And when we went to different nurseries, there was some foliar soil damage, mostly in Heuchera and Hosta, and that may be because of the low quality water that they are using. And we monitored the irrigation water in different nurseries once a month for a year, and we figured out that there is some changes in the irrigation water they are applying to the ornamental plants going in their nurseries or gardens. Here I have listed the results from one of the nursery, that is Cache Valley Nursery. We collected, as I described before, we collected samples from January all the way to the December, and we figure in Cache Valley Nursery we saw that in February the electrical conductivity, that is the salt level, was increased highly compared to other months, and the same case for sodium and chloride. Those are the major salts that cause salt damage in ornamental plants. And this may be the reason that in February they mostly use the road de-icing substance to de-ice the snow, and that causes the water contamination, and that has the effect on the growth of the plants and has shown severe foliar salt damage. So after we did this study and we showed them the results, they have switched from low quality water, secondary water, to tap water during this period of time for nursery irrigation. And there we also observed different nurseries have said that they were benefited from our study of water quality. And there are various approaches, as I mentioned before. One of them is monitoring the different salt tolerance responses of different ornamental plants. And for screening process, we mostly focused on the visual quality. However, we also took the data for plant performance, like determining their photosynthesis rate and iron concentration on the leaves of the plant tissue. And similarly, we conducted about many different projects, over 75 different projects for screening the salinity response of plants, mostly native plants, ornamental grasses, spirea, and viburnum. And here I have listed simple protocol that I followed in most of the studies. I use the nutrient solution or saline solution at different concentration. And for saline solution, we use the salt that is commonly cause the problem of salt stress in plants, that is sodium chloride and calcium chloride at molar ratio of 2:1. And irrigation events were mostly 8 weeks, and that was performed mostly once a week. I'd like to briefly show some of the results. from the study. The one of the study we did was on Sago Supreme plants. The Sago Supreme plants is a plant introduction program by USU Botanical Center and USU Center for Water Efficient Landscaping. Those plants were screened for disease and pest tolerant. However, during the evaluation process, salinity tolerance response was not considered. So we selected 4 Sago Supreme plants and screened for salinity tolerance. We found that ecologia had severe foliar soil damage at higher EC level. So briefly described from left to right, the salinity level increases. The leftmost is the control and rightmost is the highest salt level. And surprisingly, in Tetanurus, we did not see any salt damage even at higher salt treatment at 10 decibel per meter. Similarly, another experiment we conducted was on spirea, many different kinds of spirea. This is the picture that we took before harvest. The spirea species, Ugon, had severe foliar soil damage. However, Big Bang and Gold, they died after 8 weeks of treatment, but they took some time to show the damage, not like Ugon. They did after 4 weeks of treatment. And for other species, they were tolerant, even though they showed some foliar soil damage, they were tolerant to EC3 and have some tolerance level up to EC6 decibel per meter. Similarly, this is the pictures for Viburnum species. So Viburnum burkudi were mostly tolerant, and same case was for Viburnum ancivixi. However, Viburnum dilatum henneki and Viburnum plicatum summer snowflake and Viburnum trivulum were seen like sensitive to salinity stress. And from this results, the nursery growers may be benefited like to select the most tolerant Viburnum species for using in the condition where low quality irrigation water can be used. And recently we screened 4 different native plants. Those are Acrostaphylos, Sarcocarpus montanus, and Ladyfolius, and Sephodia utahensis. We observed some important results from this, like Sephodia utahensis had no foliar salt damage even after 8 weeks of treatment at higher salt level. And this looks promising that they do not have much growth reduction as well. However, Acrostaphylos had severe foliar salt damage and plants at EC10 were dead. Similar case for Sarcocarpus montanus koi. Therefore, regular water quality analysis help nursery growers and solve the problem related to irrigation water. And greenhouse screening of those ornamental plants help selection of salt-tolerant plants for nursery production. And further research will be focused on using AMF, Frankia, and other biostimulators to mitigate the salinity stress responses in plants. I'd like to thank all the collaborators and funding sources, and thank you all.
That was great. Thank you, Asmita. All right, up next we have JJ, and he's going to discuss USU's climate-ready landscape plant trials.
Hey, thank you. Can everybody hear me?
Sounds
All right.
great.
So yeah, thanks for giving me this chance to introduce this awesome project that we did at the Utah State University. So why we need this climate-ready plant project? Again, it's drought, but compared to other projects, this climate-ready plant landscape plant trial actually focus on all the Western United States because the drought affect all these regions. So during this project, we try to provide a landscape irrigation guide for the intermodal West and the other Western regions. And then basically what we want to provide the minimum irrigation rate can still maintain the acceptable or good visual quality of the landscape plant. And also we want to compare the water use of the new developed landscape plant and selecting those low water use and drought tolerance. And because in the Western US, we have very different climate regions. So actually during this project, we joined a big research group, including UC Davis, University of Washington, Oregon State University, South Coast Research Center at University of California, and the University of Arizona. And we all evaluate a similar ornamental plant, but in a different location with a different climate and the soil textures. So at the USU site, we evaluate a lot of ornamental landscape plants, and such as some roses and some rows of Sharons, and also we do some chest trees. And these plants are submitted by our nursery partners, such as Proven Winner and or the Spring Meadows, and then they submit their newly developed ornamental plants into our plots, and we do the irrigation trial for them. However, apart from the plants submitted by the nursery, at the USU site, we also do some USU developed ornamental plants, try to see the comparison between them and then the commercial landscape plants, such as we do the soldier dance daisy. That's a Seco Supreme plant developed by USU. And we also do the butterfly weed and the orderleaf mahogany. And when we do this project, in 2021, we pull up plants and irrigate them with enough water for establishment. And in this year, 2022 summer, we treat them with deficit irrigations, and each plant species will receive either high, medium, and low irrigation treatment. For those plants receive a high irrigation treatment, they are irrigated more frequently. On the other hand, for plants under low treatment, they only be irrigated once so far during the whole growing season from May to September right now. And then the irrigation amount they receive that for the high is approximately 7 gallons per plant so far. For the low treatment plant, they only receive 9 gallons of the irrigation water so far. So here is the result we found, but we're still conducting this project and collecting the data. However, surprisingly, we found some of the plants are really low water use and drought tolerant. And then 2 plants I would like to introduce to you is sitting pretty roses and soldier dance daisy. So these 2 species of plants, they still maintain really nice and beautiful visual quality with a gorgeous flower. Although the water decreased from 76 gallons per plant to 9 gallons per plant, which is the irrigation water decreased almost 90%, but their visual quality does not affect it in our trial plot. On the other hand, we also see some plant properties not suitable for the deficit irrigation treatment. And then 2 plants I would like to show you, it's the also easy double pink roses and then blue daily chest trees. And those 2 plants show gorgeous shape and a nice flower when they are in the high treatment. Unfortunately, when we reduce the irrigation to the 9 gallons per plant, the also easy double pink, they will show a serious defoliation, while the blue daily chest trees, they will have a very bad leaf wilting. After we found this really nice and fancy, great result, we want to share with the public and then the nursery grower. So in this August, we hold a USU Climate Ready Landscape Plant Trial open house and to invite everyone to our plot to see at the rate and select their favorite plant. And then during this 4-hour event, we have 47 attendees that actually came to the plot and rate the plant. And then during their rating, and they over 50% of the attendees say they learn the landscape irrigation knowledge, which is they learn that if you can use the low water use landscape plant, they can decrease the irrigation rate without hurting the visual quality. And also 94% of the attendees, they say they found a new ornamental species during this open house. And 85% of the attendees say they will want to use the plant they saw during the open house in their landscape after this open house. And then their favorite plants, surprisingly, it's also the 2 low water use plants that we found, which is the Sitting Pretty and the Soldier Dance Daisy. They are favorite, and then they also most want to use those 2 species in their house, in their yard. And then all attendees say the open house is really, really good. And some of the attendees even come and say we should have this open house more regularly in the future. So this open house and this research teach me 2 things. And then one thing is that we found that the low water use landscape plants or the plant with the drought tolerance, they can still maintain really good visual quality when the irrigation water decreased by 93%. And another thing is that for the grower and the nursery owner, according to this research, probably we found that people will prefer to use the low water use landscape plants in their landscape compared to those more sensitive to drought stress. So yeah, this is a really big project, and I want to thank a lot of people. And then I would like to take any question later. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, JJ. Again, we will get to questions at the end, but feel free to put them in that Q&A box anytime. Really appreciate the presentation. Up next, we have Jesse Matthews. Jesse is going to discuss sap yields and characteristics of sap in Norway and box elder maple trees.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so this is the title. Briefly, I'm just going to talk about maple sap and maple trees and tapping them. And there's a lot of us involved in this. You can see a long list of people, and I'm grateful for all these people helping. And there's a collaboration with lots of people in the community, like the Stokes Nature Center and other places. I just want to start a little bit with background in maples. When I say maple syrup or maples, you probably think Canada. That's what I thought, that's what I still think, and it's for good reason. We look at this table here on the left. Quebec, Canada produces almost 3/4 of the entire world's syrup production. And that is this little area here in Canada. So for good reason, Canada produces the vast majority of syrup. The next 3 top producers are in the US, and it's right in that same area. So we can tell here, this area is where maple sap and maple syrup is produced. But we actually are right here. We're nowhere near close to this. So why would we want to try to produce maple syrup and maple sap? Well, there's lots of reasons, but one of them is that we can. There's some general requirements that we need to produce maple syrup. And you need to have trees, typically in the Acer genus, those are maples. You need to have the right temperatures. I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but you need, for the sap to flow, you need to have temperatures below freezing at night and above freezing during the day with a 10-degree difference. And then number 3, you need to have the right equipment. So we have those things here in Utah. What we don't have, or what we don't know, is knowledge. We don't know how well it works here. And so that's what we're trying to figure out. Also, in recent years, people have had an increasing demand for locally produced products. And so maple syrup can be one of those products that we can produce here locally. And there's a good demand, and it can have higher prices when it's locally produced. So that's what we want to find out. So what we've tapped so far are box elder trees and Norway maple trees. Box elder trees are super common around here. People often think of them as a trash tree. They often grow near waterways, but they're all over the place, and they are a maple, so they can be tapped and produce syrup and sap. Norway maple trees aren't native, but they're a super common street tree. Like this picture I have here is just in front of my apartment, but they're all over Logan. There are no parks in the streets. The quad here at USU is almost completely surrounded by these trees. So both of these are abundant. You can find them all over. We want to see how well they produce sap. So what we did is we picked 3 areas here in Cache Valley. First one was in Smithfield. We got permission from the city to tap trees here in Mac Park, where we had 10 box elder trees and 10 Norway maple trees in this park that we tapped. And our second location was here in Logan. We couldn't get permission from the city to tap in the city, so these locations are on campus. The Norway maples are where the research greenhouses are, and the box elders are where the D. Craig Ashton Park is. So we had 10 Norway maples here and 10 box elder as well. And our third location was here in Providence. We got permission from the city. We were able to tap Norway maples here. This location is about Center Street in Maine. And then so we had 10 trees there, and then we had 10 trees in the Von Bear Park that were box elder. So total we had 60 trees, 30 Norway maple, 30 box elder spread throughout Cache Valley. So it was a lot. The data we collected was we collected sap yield every day for over a month. So you can imagine that spread, we had 60 trees spread over 20 miles. It was a big project, and there's a lot of people that helped, and I'll acknowledge them at the end, but we collected the sap every day just to measure how much we had. 4 separate occasions, we took the Brix percentage. So this uses a Brix spectrometer, and it measures sucrose levels, so it measures sugars in the sap. We also took 1 sample and sent it to the USU Analytics Laboratory here on campus, and they did a mineral content analysis for us. We also took the circumference at breast height. So if you can see in these pictures where the buckets are, we took the circumference right about at the top of that bucket. We also obtained soil type information from SoilWeb and then temperature data from Utah Ag Weather System. And these are pictures from some of our locations. This is what it looked like. Every tree had its own spile, which is this blue thing here. So we drill a hole, tap that in, and then we hang a bucket from that hook. So we had 60 trees with that kind of a setup. We took all this data from that. So this is what we found. This is sap yield. So the top graph is sap yield, how much we had every day. And you can see it kind of goes up and down, and it mimics the temperature very closely, which is the bottom one is the temperature. There's a couple areas I want to point out. Here, 25th of February, no sap is flowing. And that's because the temperature stayed below 0 degrees Celsius, so below freezing, all day and all night. So no sap was flowing. Here, if we go to the 5th of March, we can see it dips down, and at the temperature, you can see where I circled there. The reason that sap didn't flow that day is the temperature difference wasn't big enough. So if you notice these other ones where the sap was flowing, there's a big temperature difference between day and night. So that's super important. When that difference isn't there, no sap is flowing. Same here on 11th of March, it got too cold. And then over here, 21st, 19th of March, again, we didn't have a big enough temperature difference. And then finally, it just got too warm here near the end of March. So what can we learn from this? Sap flow isn't very consistent. We had some days where the buckets were almost completely full, and other days were just nothing. It's just super dependent on our temperatures. If you've ever lived in Utah, you know the temperature changes, feels like hourly. And so that's one problem here is just we don't have consistent temperatures. What we do, we can still produce sap. Here is the mineral analysis that we took. I won't go too much into it, but potassium here was the highest, which is consistent with other studies done with sugar maples in Quebec and other areas. So it holds consistent for these trees. The mineral analysis is pretty similar. The one thing I'll point out here is the phosphorus is higher than usual. So we've got higher phosphorus content, especially in the box elder trees. But that definitely begs more study to look at that. We're actually working with the food science department here on campus to develop a health drink from the sap. So the sap itself, before turning into syrup, can be used as a drink because it's got lots of good minerals. And there have been studies that suggest that there are phenolics and other compounds in the sap that have antioxidant properties and that can help prevent cancer. So there's a lot of good things contained in the sap, and we're hoping to produce a drink with that. Here's our yield data. These are the averages. Our circumference was super close. We had very uniform trees, which was awesome. So it helped us have good data with our sap yield. You can tell here from our averages that the box elder produce almost twice as much as the Nori maples. And we don't really know why. One suggestion is box elders are native, so they might do better with lower water, but their sugar content was almost the same. I want to compare this to sugar maples, which the vast majority of maple syrup comes from sugar maples. Circumference, that's just where it starts at. Most sugar maples are a lot bigger. But average yield in sugar maples is only almost 60 liters, so double what we got here. And that could be due to more water in those areas. It could also be due to more consistent temperatures. And then the sugar content in sugar maples can be what we have and can be even higher, up to 5%. So what's next with our studying? This year, we're going to continue that same study with those 60 trees, but we're also going to add more trees. We're going to add big tooth maples, which it's actually a subspecies of sugar maple. So that's kind of interesting that we have a kind of sugar maple here. They often grow in the mountains, and we're going to install these tubing systems. You can see here in the picture on the right, where you can hook up to 30 trees together on one tubing system, and it all collects it down into one area. So we're hoping to install a couple of those this year. And this little machine looking thing, that's an evaporator. We've got some of those coming. We're going to produce a lot of syrup, and we're going to do more analysis on the syrup as well, which we haven't done yet. So it'll be fun, it'll be really tasty. Anecdotally, I made some syrup from the sap that we collected, and it was super sweet and tasted really good. So it's kind of exciting. It's an exciting area of research, and it'd be cool to have Utah maple syrup someday. And I'd just like to thank these people and these organizations down here, Alyssa and Abby, were a big help collecting that sap data every day. We were able to split it up, and Paul as well filled in the gaps. And of course, Yuping is kind of heading it all. So thank you. And I look forward to your questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Jesse. Looking forward to some Utah maple syrup. We will get to questions at the end. We've got a few more presentations. Up next, we have our final student. We have Soros Berlakoti. Did I say it right? Close?
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Soros is going to be sharing his research with optimizing phosphorus applications in the nursery setting. Perfect.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, and welcome everybody to the CWEL Virtual Field Day. And thank you for the opportunity for presenting my research. Today, I'm going to present on the topic of the effect of different rate of phosphorus application in the two ground cover taxa, mainly creeping jenny and the periwinkle, that I did research within the greenhouse. You can see the plant on the screen as well. So we all know that phosphorus is one of the limiting nutrient that mainly restricts the growth in the plant. And there has been the increasing demand of phosphorus by plants due to its depletion in the soil tube. So, and the phosphorus has also the many other important function in the plants, such as the storage and the transfer of energy, as well as it also controls the most process in the plants, including photosynthesis, respiration, protein and nuclear synthesis, and other nutrient transport within the plant cell. So as the use of the fertilizer is rapidly increasing, it has many environmental hazards and runoff problems too, which has affected both the health of the soil as well as the plants. So we have tried to look on the effect of the decreasing phosphorus content on the two plants, one fast growing ground cover and other slow growing ground cover. The fast growing ground cover being the creeping jenny, Lysimachia, and the slow growing ground cover being the periwinkle, Catharanthus. Here you can see the graph of the trend of phosphorus use and the price, as well as the future prediction. So the price of the phosphorus fertilizer has been increasing with the ongoing years, and it will increase in the future too. So, and the graph shows that from the year 2020 to the 2021, the price of the phosphorus fertilizer is nearly the double as it was on the 2020. And as well as the consumption of the phosphorus has also been increasing. If you look on the right graph, the consumption of the phosphorus fertilizer, there has been the increasing trend on the use of the phosphorus fertilizer. So the demand of the phosphorus fertilizer has been increasing, and there has been the heavy use of the phosphorus fertilizer, and the decreasing the amount of the phosphorus fertilizer while growing the ornamental plants can help to reduce the price of the price for the gardener, as well as the price increase their profit as well. And so we did the research for this on the two plants, and we basically had 6 different concentration of phosphorus as the treatments, 1 mg per liter, 3 mg per liter, 6 mg per liter concentration of phosphorus, and other 2 treatments receiving 3 and 6 mg per liter concentration twice, while the control receives the 6 mg per liter phosphorus every time we irrigate. And so phosphorus was applied after 1 week of the transplantation, and after a month, 3 mg per liter and 6 mg per liter of phosphorus was provided on the 2 treatment that received the twice amount of the phosphorus. So, and all other nutrients such as nitrogen and potassium are also applied on the recommended dose, and other micronutrient were also applied on the recommended dose. And the irrigation was provided when the moisture level was reduced below 25% that we observed from the moisture sensor. And we continued the research for around 3 months and collected the different data from the research. So after analyzing the data that we received from these plants, here looking at the total fresh weight and the dry weight of the plant on both creeping jenny and the periwinkle, we found that there was not much difference on the weight of the plants in all of the treatment in both of the plant creeping jenny and the periwinkle. So the reducing the amount of the phosphorus to 1 mg per liter concentration has did not affect the total fresh as well as the dry weight of the plants in both creeping jenny and the periwinkle. Yes, coming to us the length of the plants. So we basically measure the length of all the branches of the plants, and we basically average the length. And while looking at the length of the plants, there was also no any difference in the mean length in all of the treatments. So the decreasing the amount of the phosphorus concentration did not affect the length of the plants in the creeping jenny and periwinkle. You can also see the representative plant picture and each treatment on the below the graph. Here's the furthermore picture of the plants with each treatment in the left being the 1 mg to 3 mg 6 and the control on the right. The left one is the periwinkle and the right one is the creeping jenny. And now coming to the conclusion from all the research and analysis of the data obtained from the research, we concluded that reducing the concentration of phosphorus to 1 mg per liter while applying all other fertilizer in the recommended dose had no any significant effect on the growth as well as the biomass of both creeping jenny and the periwinkle that were grown on the container. But still there are a few limitations of the data that we are yet to receive, like the soil analysis data and the tissue analysis data. So from which we can also know the amount of the nutrient in the soil as well as in the substrate, and also know more about the effect of the reducing phosphorus in the creeping jenny and the periwinkle. And just more photo of the taking data, and that's all. I'll just respond to query after this, and thank you for listening to the end.
That was great. Thank you. So the last 4 presentations that you guys heard were all from students, and we just put a link in the chat box that goes to a survey with questions that are specific to those 4 presentations. Okay, we've got 2 presentations left. Up next, we've got Satal Pudial. Satal is going to present on rethinking the types of plants that we grow and our irrigation practices.
Hi, welcome everyone, and I hope you all can see me and my slides.
It looks good.
Okay, good. So, so today I joined CWEL last year in August, and I have been developing my program all focused on water conservation and sustainable production of landscape plants. And I have few students working under my program and few technicians and other people helping me. Kelly has been really great, and so we were able to do quite a bit in this short duration of time. But now, again, I would like to welcome you all in this CWEL Field Day presentation, and let's move on. So the basis for my program and my research here at USU is because of this existing drought. The population of Utah is growing at a rapid pace. It's one of the fastest growing states in the nation, and the snowpack is decreasing. So there is more water restriction. Like every summer we hear news here and there restricting water use, and like the declaration of emergency over drought. We also have high outdoor water use. We used to be a big agricultural state, and still we have that culture. And then and we have these old plants, and now we need to switch with our both practices and plants. So we need to be water wise, and we need to be really wise on what plant we use. And all my research focus around that. And with that, I would like to dive into what my program at CWEL here at Utah State is doing. So for the first research that I would like to talk about is conducted by Jenny Kohler, who is also a CWEL student, and she has been great. She is working in Caseville, and she has 2 ongoing projects. The first project that we're looking at is the interaction, as Paul Harris, he talked about the nitrogen and how much is good, how do plants recover. We are also trying to see how the high, medium, and low dose of fertilizer interact with high, medium, and low irrigation practices, what effect does the combination of different ratios of fertilizer and water brings on ornamental plants. And usually what we tend to see is the treatment or the irrigation treatment started around after the plants are established. But here what we are trying to do is we are trying to stress out the plant. We irrigate them well for a month, and then we jump in the treatment. So the plant would be receiving the water stress and fertilizer treatment right from the first year. And we would observe the recovery of those plants, see how plants are doing, how different fertilizer and water interact. The other research that Jenny is also working on is different soil amendments. So we are growing perennial plants, and like basically we dig a hole when we plant the plant. So what we are doing is we are replacing 25% soil of that hole with either coconut coir, vermiculite, peat moss, or soil super absorbent polymer. This super absorbent polymer is a big marketing theme right now. So we are trying to see if we can amend those soils with these different kind of substrate. Can we grow plant with low irrigation? So again, that's ongoing. And as you can see in my slide, both of these research, and Jenny is standing over there, and we don't have the data yet, but that's ongoing, and we will have some data by the fall of this year and next year as well. We also have a research going where we are using different concentration of humic acids and different evapotranspiration reducers, super absorbent polymers, and we are doing a small pilot study in spiraeas in container plants, and we're trying to find out, can we irrigate less, or can the soil hold more water with those soil amendments? And from the preliminary findings that we have, as you can see in this thermal imaging here, this one's a little bit blue, and this plant looks good. So these plants were wilted. We applied the treatment for 2 months. We have all those growth data and conductance like water conductance data and a lot more. But at the final stage, we stretched this out. We stretched this plant by restricting irrigation for 3 days. And you can see one of these treatment, evapotranspiration reducer treatments, kind of doing good. The plant's not wilted, all other plants are wilted. So again, we are still analyzing the data. And as I told you, this is just my first year here at USU. So we have things going. We are still waiting to jump into any conclusion, but we do have some promising thing in this research. The other research that Saroj already talked about is phosphorus research, and he explained it very well. We are doing this phosphorus trial. Conventionally, container producer apply nitrates and phosphorus and other kind of nutrient each time they irrigate, but we are trying to go low and see how low can we go. And the rate we are talking about here, like P 1 mg, 3 mg, 6 mg, 3 mg twice, 6 mg twice, is all elemental P. So when we look at P fertilizer, you need to multiply that by 2.3. So 1 mg would be 3 mg of phosphorus fertilizer in general if you are looking at P205. But still, we did see some encouraging data that tells us to lower phosphorus than what we have been using or what we are using. The other research Saroj didn't talk about is also the research that he's leading is also looking at what kind of container substrate would be good to reduce nitrate and phosphorus leachate from the containers. And the rationale behind this research is, along with water, like decreasing water availability, we also have eutrophication, water pollution because of nitrate and phosphate in our runoff. So typically nursery producer would apply water enough to leach out salts. And with those water, there is also nitrate and phosphates that's leaching out. So here we are trying to look at various combination of substrate where we are using pine bark and sphagnum moss, pine bark, coconut coir. We are trying to amend it with biochars and without biochars. So all these combinations, we are trying to see if any combination is good to limit the leaching of nitrate and phosphorus. Ultimately, if we have anything, the research is still ongoing, and you can see in the pictures here. So what we do is we apply water for like 2 weeks, and then we have this leachate collected in this big orange box, and then we collect those leachate and we send them for analysis, or we do some analysis here at home, and we measure the phosphorus concentration in those samples. Also, JJ and Soros are also involved in this climate ready plants research that me, Yoping, and other members are leading here at USU. And JJ already explained a lot about this. I will not go more in detail, but we are trying to see which plants is better to Utah climate. The other research that I will be leading on, and which had just started, is teaching leaders in community like extension person, big nursery growers, person involved in water conservancy districts, DNR people. So we will select 25 of those person from each, like 25 from upper Utah, 25 of those leader people working with water and plants from mid Utah, and 25 in lower Utah. So 75 participants in total. And so we'll be training them on how to implement water recycling techniques in nursery. As we already talked about, water is limited, and along with water, the runoff produced by nursery also has those nitrate and phosphorus. So if we can trap those things in a reservoir or a small pond and use it back to the plants. And that has been done in eastern part of the US. It's not been done much in this western part of US, except few operations in California. So we are trying to bring this technology here, bring these techniques here at home in Utah State. And this picture here is from a nursery in Maryland, and how they capture their runoff water here at this big pond. Also, this one, the one on your left, is a small research plot at Michigan State that I was working on. So we are also trying to work with Progressive Plants and Big Trees Nursery, and Candice and me will be leading the demonstration part of the project, but this project would be training people so that when it comes to recycling water, we have those minds and people who can help us navigate those kind of things. The other project that we'll shortly be working is also on implementing smart controllers on small nursery producers and grow garden centers here at Utah, northern Utah, because northern Utah is where most of the concentration of these kind of small garden center and nursery growers are in the state. So we'll be working on that in very soon. And so so these are the projects that I am focused on here at CWEL, and it has been really awesome being part of CWEL. Everyone here is really supportive, and I'm glad that with help of all my students and my technicians and our team, I was able to get this project started, and some of them are even completed. So with all that, that was a glimpse of our CWEL ornamental research here at USU. And if you have any questions, feel free to type in. I also have my email address. I am an extension horticulture specialist for ornamental plants. So if you have any questions on ornamental plants, any consulting and things like that, I do it all for free. So feel free to email me and any questions, and I will respond to those. With that, I thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Satal. I appreciate it. Okay, up last, but certainly not least, we have Chris McGinty with the Water Maps team. Chris is going to be discussing their water conservation work with Salt Lake City Department of Public Utilities and how they are applying and implementing landscape water use budgets and analysis through the utility service there.
All right. You hear me and see everything?
Yes, and yes.
All right, perfect. Well, thanks everybody for the opportunity to be here with you today. It's our pleasure to talk to you. Some of you will be getting an update. Some of you will be seeing this for the first time. But here on behalf of Dr. Joanna Entrawada, who is a professor and project PI on this project and is in the Environment and Society and Quincy College Natural Resources. Also on behalf of Chris Gerard, who's our senior programmer and analyst too here in the Remote Sensing GIS Lab in Wildland Resources in CNR. And Ellie Leitzman-Ginty, who's our remote sensing scientist and researcher 3 and does a lot of our land cover work and a lot of other work with our technicians. So today we're going to talk about water maps analysis for Salt Lake City Department of Public Utilities. And this project has been going on for quite a while now because it's been quite successful, and we've had a lot of good opportunities to really make some inroads in water conservation at a parcel level in these municipalities. So we have the 3-phase project right now. We're finishing up phase 2 and moving into phase 3, but phase 1 was a couple of years ago. We created a baseline water maps analysis, and we'll talk about what this water maps analysis is here in just a minute, but really looking at single family residential parcels and really providing evidence to the city and the utility that there's capacity to conserve. And we've had a number of other opportunities to work with other folks around the state. And so this is something that we're continuing to do in a number of areas, but really moving into this phase 2, which really getting to the meat of things, we were able to work with the Utah Climate Center, install a network of 6 updated weather stations around the Salt Lake City Department of Public Utilities service area. And then looking at development of a water conservation manager viewing application that we'll talk about here in just a couple minutes, and certainly doing some water maps analysis for commercial, industrial, and institutional properties. Phase 3, which we'll be moving into here not too far out, December, January timeframe, is really looking at multifamily residential parcels, reassessment of single family parcels, where we're looking, there's been changes in landscaping over the last number of years since we've done our initial land cover mapping effort. Just a little bit about the public utility area for Salt Lake City. It's about 75,000 acres, so it's not small. Salt Lake City takes up 44,000 of those acres, and then there's about 8 other municipalities plus unincorporated areas within the county that make up the rest of that. So the utility actually services a number of different municipalities in the greater Salt Lake area. So kind of just getting started about what Water Maps is, for those of you that haven't heard about it previously. Water Maps is a custom water demand management tool that's being used to promote and guide landscape water conservation. And really this urban landscape water conservation is really important management goal for local governments, because landscape irrigation is the largest use of residential culinary water during the summer months, especially, of course. And it's also helping city governments, especially Salt Lake City and the utility, to identify where urban water conservation might be improved. And really where this water maps can be conducted is across all of these parcels that residential, commercial, industrial, institutional. The water maps analysis itself integrates land cover data, and that's what this slide is showing, water meter data and weather data, really to identify the parcels that have this capacity to conserve well, certainly conserve water and certainly change their landscaping if they would like to do so in the future. The land cover data really provides valuable information about the composition, distribution, and the area of different land cover types within an individual or given parcel. And the water meter data are really integrated, is clearly important in getting how much is being used monthly on that parcel. And then that has to be analyzed to look at how much water is basically needed on the parcel versus how much is being used, differences between summer and winter use, and a number of other calculations. And then weather data is really important for that reference evapotranspiration value to look at how much water is actually needed by the plants and land cover that's growing on the ground. So what does this all end up getting us? Ultimately, landscape irrigation ratios is what we come up with. These LIRs are kind of the crux of the entire analysis. And really the LIR is, it's looking at water use that's estimated based by water need that's estimated. And it comes out at this nice ratio, but the data inputs are really integrated into the model to calculate and geographically display a measurement of LIR. And it's looking at this estimate of need versus use. And we can really look at identifying, is this parcel based on the land cover, based on the weather, the climate data that's being fed into the model, is this parcel or this person who owns this property actually being efficient with their watering, or is there an opportunity for conservation managers really to move forward in certain, within certain areas or neighborhoods to help facilitate additional conservation? So you can see here on this slide, 1 or less than 1 is what we consider efficient. As you move up between 1 and 2, it's acceptable, inefficient, and then excessive. And this isn't meant to be a shaming tool by any means. It's certainly meant to be an educational tool that we can then provide information, not just to water conservation managers or folks within the utility, but certainly out to the public, and we'll see that in just a minute. The other thing, when we're talking about looking at how we characterize, or categorize landscape water use for conservation priorities, we can kind of take those categories and those LIRs that we talked about just a second ago, and I'd like to point out just 2 of these categories here, and that's the lower left, which is category 3. And this is showing kind of that low conservation priority. Okay, so low conservation priority means that they're low volume, they're not using a lot of water in general, and they have a low LIR overall. So they're either doing good, or they've given up, they're not watering anymore, or maybe they can't afford to water. There's something that keeps them in this kind of category 3, and they're not higher on the conservation priority list. Whereas if you go up to the upper right quadrant of this graph, you're looking at that high conservation priority. These are the folks that are really pouring the water on, they're using large volumes of water, and they also have a high LIR. So they're, it looks like they're using quite a lot of water on their landscapes, and there's some opportunity for a conservation manager to really approach these folks and get into helping them identify where they can make some changes. I had mentioned the Water Maps Manager Viewing application. This is something that Chris Gerard has been working on developing this last year. And it really geographically displays the landscape irrigation ratio values, the water use, the water need, conservation priorities category, and land cover data, so that the manager, so this is not visible to the public, this is something that the manager can go in and look at all of this, visualize this change over time, and really investigate how individual parcels or neighborhoods are changing in response to different perhaps conservation programming efforts that are going on. So the other thing is that you can look back and forward in time, as I said, and you can swipe back and forth. So the manager really has a nice opportunity to explore this data in detail. The other thing that we've been doing, and this is another application that Chris has programmed this last year, and then Ellie is working with a small group of technicians, is a lot of single-family residential quality assurance and quality control. And this application that Chris has developed really allows the reviewer to look at the data in depth. So this is us looking on from the programmatic side, really looking into how is the data looking? Are we seeing anomalies in the data? For instance, do the LIR values or changes in LIR values look appropriate? We can take a look at all the water meter data. So all that water meter data is fed in. We can take a look at that. Are there anomalies? Are there negative reads? Are there things that we need to identify as we move forward? Reviewing the accuracy of the land cover data. So that's available. The technicians can look at the imagery and look at the change in land cover data through time. And then certainly something that a lot of people don't realize is that how important parcel boundaries are. So we can identify where there might be parcel boundary issues, and that can be fed back to the city and the state to correct those issues, to fix parcel boundary or make adjustments if necessary. Something else we've worked on this year is developing these residential reports, and this is draft effort that we're putting together right now in conjunction with Stephanie Dewar in Salt Lake at the utility. But you can see on the left there, we have a nice fact sheet that talks about what water maps is, how the vegetation and land cover is mapped, how is the LIR calculated, and how to interpret this information. And on the right is the report that will be going out to residents. Eventually, we want to be sending these out to over 75,000 different residences. But this actually shows your landscape mapped. It shows what your composition of your landscape is, looks at outdoor use versus landscape need for water, looks at what you have used, and then provides a monthly landscape irrigation ratio over this past year or over the ongoing year. And so this is all private information. This is not something that everybody would be blasted out, but it's something that they can take and then really get an idea of how they're doing. And then just quickly wrapping up here, the other thing that's been put together is the residential, with the residential reports is just a hints and tips and tricks, if you will, of water conservation. So this is something that will go out to the parcel, or well, I should say landowners or the property owners or folks living at the property, giving them an idea of different types of Utah projects that they can look into to help conserve water within their community. And certainly that'll be a nice opportunity for folks to really hit into CWEL and different types of extension websites and other types of ongoing efforts in the state. And lastly, we've spent this year doing a lot of updates to the Water Maps website. So if you would like to take a look at the website, please go to watermaps.usu.edu. If you have questions, greater questions than what can be answered here, certainly shoot any of us emails and we'll get back to you. But thanks for the opportunity to talk to you today, and thanks for coming.
Great, thank you, Chris. Okay, let's get all the presenters back and we'll do the Q&A session. So the very first question is for Paul Harris. Would the drought recovery be affected if there was a lot of foot traffic during the stress period?
That's a good question. We didn't evaluate that, but I can comment just in a general observation. So the areas around the border of our plots that didn't receive any water, we're constantly driving on those with mowers and carts. So they're heavy trafficked areas and they recover, they recover every year from the drought that we receive. Our border areas in between our plots that are unirrigated that we drive on with utility vehicles, those recover, quite nicely every year. So from that specific research, I can't speak to that, but in general, we do see that turf does recover, from drought once it's been kind of in that, drought stage for a couple of weeks. The plots, they do get, some plots get walked on twice a week, really concentrated, as we take pictures, collect data, that sort of thing. So they do get some traffic on them, but I wouldn't say it's heavy traffic. That's another thing we want to look at. We've had that same question from golf course superintendents, is what level of foot traffic or cart traffic can we, put on these and have them still recover? And I think once the soil gets hard enough from drought, I think you can basically drive a tank on it and nothing really happens. So yeah, I would expect your, drought stressed turf, tank and turf is trout. Your turf can handle light, moderate foot traffic under drought stress. It might not look good, but it will come back.
Okay, thank you, Paul. I appreciate it. Okay, so this is a question for Jesse with the maples. Does tapping the trees, does it damage the tree?
No, not at all.
Okay.
There's been lots of research done, and the smallest generally that you want to tap is if it's a 10-inch diameter tree. So anything above that diameter, you're safe to. And then at certain points, even larger diameters, you can have up to 3 or 4 taps. But generally what they do is they tap into place, and then the next year they tap like a foot away and the trees recover. There's been studies done and there's been no reduced growth. So
okay, so they do not use the same, they don't use the same tapping point year after year?
No. So they change the tapping point every year, and it's just such a small spot, and you're taking such a small part of the phloem that it doesn't really affect the tree.
Gotcha. Cool. Thanks. Okay. Next question is for Saros. So where is the phosphorus fertilizer mostly coming from? Like companies or states?
So for our research, we basically bought the potassium phosphate monobasic from the Sigma trees. But before applying those on our plants, we basically did the analysis whether the level amount is coming out from the fertilizer. So basically, we just researched and looked on the amount of the phosphorus coming from the fertilizer before applying into the plants. So it might not be different if we use any the fertilizer from any companies if the desired amount of the phosphorus is coming out from the fertilizer. So basically what I use from the Sigma Ultras that I bought from the campus store of Utah State.
Okay, cool. Did you work with any micronutrients?
In the research, we actually try to look on the phosphorus majorly, but we are yet to receive the analysis of the plant tissue where we are also looking at the micronutrients like zinc, iron, and other things, but we have not yet received the data from the analysis of those plants. So we'll be looking on those data, but we are yet to receive them.
Gotcha. And then did you use the same fertilizer in all the tests, or did you vary as appropriate?
So all the fertilizer that was used in the research was the same.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, I believe this one is for Satal. Why would the polymer reduce water use?
So the companies that claim super absorbent polymer would be good for drought condition is because, like, think as it like a diaper or something. So when you apply water, it pulls that water in, and then a little change from the diaper, like if the plants need it, it will just release it back to the plants. So that's what they tell the super absorbent polymers would do. Of course, if it does or doesn't, we are yet to see, but that's why we use it. The company claims that it can hold the water in itself instead of letting it evaporate or like letting it leach down. And then when the plants need it, it'll just release it to the plants. So that's the reason we just wanted to see.
Great. Are those biodegradable?
Most of the SAPs are non-biodegradable, meaning once we put it in the soil, they will be there doing their job. If it is like it's working as it should, it'll be there. So they are non-biodegradable. So if you have a concern with biodegradability, which might be a topic of other research that we might do, it's still like it's not biodegradable.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we've got quite a few water maps questions. So Chris, could you give us just a little background on who developed water maps, when it was designed?
Sure. Yep. Water maps it's been an effort that's been going on for quite a while. Was developed through CWEL with a number of different people have been involved over the years. And the goal of this was to really help conservation managers and identify ways to look at at parcel level water use based on the water, or I should say outdoor residential water use based on land cover and need and certainly the water that was being recorded as used on the meter. So there's a number of folks that have been involved over the years, not just Chris, Ellie, and myself, but Joanna's been working with a number of folks through CWEL and others to develop the software. So it's been rewritten. Chris has done a lot of work rewriting this software over the last few years, and that's why we're working now we finished working with Eagle Mountain City, and now on with Salt Lake City to continue the effort. So. Again, somebody asked about the link. It's watermaps.usu.edu, and you can read about the kind of the history and lineage of the program there as well.
Great, thank you. And just for clarification, you don't use the software to identify leaks?
No, but I've actually had that question a couple of times because we do spend so much time in this the manager application that's been developed allows you to kind of really dig into some of looking at how water use is being recorded. You could identify where things are happening. You may not know it's a water leak necessarily, but you would know something if you have a huge spike in water use and you don't have a swimming pool that you're filling up or something. You may be able to identify something like that, but the utility can also identify that kind of stuff by their own analytics within their department. So
okay. Does your website, does it have publications or other results from the work that you guys have done?
There are publications there, and we're working on a bunch of things right now. But one thing I wanted to get to Julie's question is none of the results for individual homeowners are published to the public domain. This is all private information. It's held closely because everybody's water meter data is used for their own analysis. And so none of these reports that you see would be seen by anybody but the team and the conservation folks or the utility folks. You would get your own individualized report. You could share it with your neighbor if you wanted to, but none of this is public data.
Gotcha. Thank you for clarifying that. Do you see this information being used if water allocations are ever needed?
I guess that's up to the conservation manager. I don't know if I want to wade into that discussion, but
Fair
certainly, you know, this isn't meant to be political. It's not meant to be for shaming. It's meant to be for education, opportunity for conservation, and really looking at what's going on in the landscape. And so all these fine folks that have been here presenting today, you know, their research and their work can be put to use to identify these different types of plants and cultivars and things that can be used on the landscape in this really dry and drying environment to you know, reduce water use on a residential level.
Great, thank you. Let's see, I put the link, I don't remember who made the comment, but somebody said the link wasn't working, so I just threw it on your responses and then put it in the chat box for you.
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay, so this is a question for Chris. Will the city of Logan use water maps to refine their management practices of parks?
Logan City hasn't shown any interest in using water maps.
No, okay.
At the moment. I mean, they may in the future, but
they actually used water maps in the past.
They did in the past, but
They
right.
have.
So
Okay.
no interest isn't quite right.
Well, yeah, you're right. But there's no interest right now. And I've made some, you know, comments towards the facts that they should be using it, but not right now. So
perfect. Well, not perfect, but great response. Okay, let's see. It looks like that is it for our questions. Thank you all for joining us and sticking with us for nearly 2 hours. And thank you for all the presenters for sharing the amazing projects that you guys are all working on. We really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day. We'll see you guys next month.